What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 430. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line, all the way from Denver, Colorado, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. Luis, welcome. How goes?
It's going well. It's going well.
How's your week?
Good. I've gotten to play with some Jace the Mind Sculptors, which it's been a while. That card is pretty nice.
Yeah. You were streaming last night. You were playing the Taking Turns deck?
Yeah, the deck that with like Time Warp and Temporal Mastery and Exhaustion, and then Jace and As Foretold. Just a lot of cool stuff going on, and I managed to, do pretty well at 3-0 with the deck before we ended up switching to a different deck. But it was a lot of fun. Oh
man, Jace the Mind Sculptor better than all it turns out. I'm a little worried about that one for Modern, but we'll see how it works out. For this show though, we're not talking Jace the Mind Sculptor. We're talking Limited, and we're going to be doing a set re-review and an Ixalan overrated, underrated podcast today. So this is going to take a look back at the Rivals of Ixalan set review and see what changed, what we know now versus what we knew then. And then also just take a snapshot at Ixalan, because things are different there too. And it's really easy to carry over your previous assessments of a set and not remember that things are different now, and you need to reevaluate those ones too. So big change when a new set comes in, and we're going to be diving deep on that today. Before we get into it, channelfireball.com. That's the place to go for everything you need Magic related on the internet. You can check out CFB for really anything. If you need sealed product, they're going to have it. You're going to get Rivals of Ixalan. You can even get some Rivals and some regular Ixalan so that you can do a booster draft with your friends. Or, if you are looking to get into Modern and you want to pick up some of those cards that go in the new decks maybe that were formed from the unbannings of Jace and Bloodbraid Elf, well, you're going to be able to find those too. They're going to get it out to you quickly as well, and they have really great customer service. On top of all that, you get free content. Free! Not every website has free. The Channel Fireball has free right on the front page, and this is premium stuff. I mean, top-tier content from some of the best players and content producers in the game. Please do check them out. That is channelfireball.com. Of course, the show is also brought to you by you via the Patreon. That's right. If you feel like, you know what, I like this show, I'd like to give back to it. I feel like I've gotten something out of this. And even though it's free, I want to give something anyway. Patreon.com/limited resources has all the information where you can go. You get a bunch of cool perks. And one of them, Patreon question of the week. That's right. You get to submit questions, and we pick one of them per week to answer on the show. So this one comes from our friend Drago, who says, "Hey, Marshall and Luis, I don't have a lot of money, so I don't have a big collection on Magic Online or in paper." And by the way, I think that's kind of the baseline, right? Like, Magic's expensive, and it's hard to maintain even one collection, let alone having it both on Magic Online and in paper. So Drago, you're certainly not alone there. He says, "Can I improve in Magic from playing other card games such as Eternal, Luis, and or Hearthstone? And do you think it's possible to be a top player in multiple games? Cheers, guys." Cool question, Drago. I'm going to send this one over to you, Luis, as you work on one of these other games, Eternal. He throws Hearthstone in there as well. Do you think it helps out?
So I do work on Eternal, so I play a ton of Eternal. I actually have played a fair amount of Hearthstone as well, and I play a ton of other games. I do like gaming. Do I think it makes you better at Magic? It's actually kind of an interesting question, because the answer is both yes and no. Mm-hmm. So yes, I believe gaming makes you better at games.
Yep.
Like, if you were to take, let's say, one of the best Hearthstone players, and you were to tell them, like, you need to qualify for the Pro Tour within a year, mm-hmm. I think that all of them would have a very good shot at it. If not, they wouldn't be guaranteed, because of course that's just not how any of this works. But I think if you take any of the, the top, 16 people on ladder, or someone who's the people who've won recently in big tournaments, there's a good chance of that. And I think the same is true for Eternal, and the same goes the other way for Magic compared to these other games, because a lot of the strategic thinking that really behooves you to learn in one game, it applies to a lot more than just the specific cards you're using. There's a reason that we see a lot of overlap between poker and Magic.
Yeah,
right? We you do play poker pretty seriously, and we both know a lot of people who are very accomplished in the poker world.
Absolutely.
So it's not random that these people have the same kind of skill sets. And again, that also goes both ways, because these games select for people who are going to be good at them. Like, the people who tend to go really deep on games are the people who have a natural aptitude for them. Mm-hmm. But I think that these games do test the same things, and practicing for one helps to practice for another. Where I would say no is that it is going to be very difficult to be like a top player in multiple games without a ton of time investment. So to go back to like a strictly Magic perspective, I do think that playing like cube drafts does make you better at Magic overall. It helps both your fundamentals and your skills in dealing with a lot of the different situations the cube throws at you. If you wanted to be the best Rivals of Ixalan drafter and qualify for the Pro Tour via that method, or be the best modern player and qualify via that method, right? I'm using qualifying for the Pro Tour as a benchmark. You don't need to qualify to prove you're good or anything like that. I'm just saying like that's a measurable goal. I would tell you not to cube draft. I would tell you to play modern or play Rivals draft. Like the best way to get really good at a thing is to play that thing. That said, if you're asking whether playing these kind of like parallel things will help you, the answer is still yes. It just won't help you as much. So to the TLDR is, if you want to get better at Magic, the best way is to play Magic, specifically the type of Magic you want to improve in. Playing other games will help you get better at Magic and better at broadening your skill set and also sharpening your decision-making skills. So it is definitely not wasted time if your goal is to improve.
I've always wondered about this. Is there like a pecking order to the competitive gaming scene? And what I mean by that are some games considered higher on, basically harder to be really good at than others?
It's hard for me to tell exactly because I've never gone super deep in Hearthstone. I'm not by any means a professional poker player. I've played very few hands of poker lifetime, and even though I play a lot of Eternal, I think I understand the game very well. I don't play competitively there because I work on it. So if I were to say like which is the hardest game to get good at, I don't know. It depends what you're talking about. There's a lot of context that goes with it. I think that in general, Magic is very complicated and very deep, and there's a lot of different ways to play it. But can I tell you specifically whether like Ixalan Draft is harder to play than Hearthstone Constructed or Hearthstone Arena or whatever? I can't really say, because Hearthstone has a lot of things that are simpler, but it also has a lot of very complicated things. And especially in Constructed, so much of the game is like, you have these matchups where every card in your deck matters, every card in their deck matters, and knowing how to play them out is very important. So that's a very different skill. So, and I can't really speak to poker as much at all. There's a lot that goes into it. I think most people tend to think that the game that they're the best at is the hardest game. So that's a pretty natural tendency.
That was one of the answers that I was thinking too. Also, there's a tendency to follow money, right? Like whatever the game
poker has everything beat in terms of money. So that's pretty hard to argue. And then it gets fuzzier when you look at the other games because there's just a lot of different ways to look at it. But
all right, well, great question, Drago. Go ahead.
Certainly, if you were given the option of being the most successful poker player in the world, you would choose that over being the most successful Magic the Gathering, Hearthstone, Eternal player in the world,
Yeah.
But it's also like saying you'd rather be the most successful basketball player in the world than the most successful like curling player in the world.
Yeah,
but
totally.
It doesn't speak to which one is harder.
No, not necessarily. Yeah. And I can say, as somebody who's, put significant amount of time into both poker and Magic, that I think Magic's harder. There's just way more going on. And it's also a more focused down game. There's not a lot of poker that's played heads up. We call it, one-on-one, where basically all Magic is. You don't get rest. Like in poker, you just fold your hand and then there's like 3 minutes.
Brings a tablet and plays Magic Online at the downtime at the table, of which there's a lot of.
Yes. So anyway, great question, Drago. Thanks for that. Let's cool. Crack ourselves a pack. Got some rivals here. Since I'm all out of alpha packs. Moment of Triumph is the first card out.
Playable, but not exciting.
You can play it. Negate, no. Orazka Raptor. I'm sorry, bro, but you just have not found a home. This is a 2 red 3/4.
Yeah, even a card we're going to read because a lot of people will not have played it and won't know what it is.
Yeah. This one is a card that I value maybe a little too highly. I think it's going to be a front runner for card I have most of, is Dusk Legion Zealot. It's the 1 and a black 1/1 vampire, and when it ETBs, you draw a card and lose a life.
Yeah, the card's good.
Am I too high on?
No, it's a 2-drop that's good at any point in the game. Has a little bit of tribal synergies and just is overall a good card.
Gets my Ascend going too. I like that about it. Hardy Veteran. Come down on this one a fair bit just because this isn't really what I want to be doing, really at all, but it's the one in a green 2/2, and when it's your turn, it's 2/4.
Yep.
Fine. Dinosaur Hunter. Come up on that one actually a little bit. It's 1 and a black for a 2/2, and it has Dinosaur Death Touch.
It's like, not even the best card for 1 and a black that we've seen in these last 5 cards.
No, not even close. Cleansing Ray. No. Water Knot. There's a card. 1 blue.
Oh, this is my pick right now.
Yeah, taps down the creature and it stays that way.
The blue removal spell is very good, and I like blue in the format. So this is also pretty unconditional. It shuts down just about everything you'd want to.
It really does. Yeah, I'm a big fan. A Razka Relic card. I wish that I thought maybe by now we'd see a little bit more play, but it's
3 mana for an artifact that taps for a colorless, and if you have the City's Blessing, you can tap and sack it to gain 3 and draw a card.
Yeah.
I always want to play this, but I always cut it, even in the decks where I think it might be good. Like, and that to me shows that the card's not quite good enough. Like, yeah,
I agree.
Even in the slow City's Blessing, Ascend, like decks with 5 drops and card draw, like this doesn't quite make the cut, which means like, yeah, I'm not going to end up. You should almost never prioritize this.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's close. The times I have played it, I'm like, this was fine. You know, I got my card back, I got some life, and it ramped me out. It seems like it, but it just, you really need to, there's not a lot of room in these decks. Squyres Devotion is our last common. 2 and a white gives a creature +1/+1 and lifelink, and you get a 1/1 vampire. I like it, but I like Water Knot better.
Agreed. I think Squyres Devotion is the second best card here.
Yeah. All right. Let's get into the uncommons. Sky Marcher Aspirant is our first one. White for a 2/1 vampire, and it's got Ascend. It's got flying if you got the City's Blessing.
This card's quite good because
it is pretty good. Yeah.
It's a good early play, and it's quite relevant later. I still think it's worse than Water Knot, and I think it's worse than Squyres Devotion as well, but it's not by much.
I agree. I agree with both of those. I would take Squyres Devotion over it, but it's better than I thought. I actually thought it was going to be not super great before, and now I kind of like it. Pride of Conquerors, 1 and a white instant. Creatures you control get +1/+1, but if you got the City's Blessing, they get +2/+2 instead. It's an instant. That's
this card's fine.
This game. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the black-white deck with a bunch of Legion Conquistadors does eventually want this to punch through, but there's also a lot of decks that are just on the controlling side, and they have 10 spells already, so they just will not end up playing this.
Yeah. Ooh, we got a competitor. And by competitor, I mean get out of here, Water Knot. Golden Demise.
Yeah, this has been a controversial card on Twitter recently.
Controversial from one person.
Well, no, actually, so what I'm talking about is that Dustin Stern did put out a list of underrated and overrated cards, and he thought this was overrated and it wasn't even very good. I fired back pretty quickly, and most people seem to be on the camp of, yes, Golden Demise is very good, which I think we both think is true. Mike Squyres, though, actually, Siggy did kind of weigh in saying, like, yeah, I've been not that impressed with this card.
Oh, interesting.
Their logic being it doesn't kill the one big threat they often lose to. My logic being when this card is good, it's a 10 out of 10 and a Plague Wind, and when it's bad, sometimes, yes, it doesn't kill their 5/5, but so many boards, this card is just so good. And so I'm slamming Golden Demise here, barring a high pick rare.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I liked the list that Dustin put out, though. I thought his take on the format was interesting, and it generally lined up with how I view it as well. Like, I was like, yeah, I see where you're going. I see where you're going. That was the only one that stood out to me, was the Golden Demise. But the rest are kind of the stuff that you and I like to get into, the nitty gritty of like little differences. And I like it, but I don't love it. There's a lot to discuss. I thought it
was an interesting list. But Golden Demise, I think I disagreed with that one.
Yeah. Our rare is not going to lure you away from Golden Demise here, Luis. It's Awakened Amalgam. Do you remember what that does?
It's forecasting cost. It's an XX, where X is the number of differently named lands you control.
Yeah, that's right.
I played against the great Ben Rubin, Hall of Famer, and he had this card in his deck, and it could have the possibility of being a 7/7, I think.
Oh, that's great.
But
yeah.
That involves not cracking Evolving Wilds.
I played against a 4/4 Awakened Amalgam. I was like, bravo. The flavor text is great. It's the fools have done it.
That is awesome flavor text.
By Tishana. Yeah, it's really great. All right. But Golden Demise is where we want to be on that, with a close second on Water Knot, and then third place. Legion,
I think
Zealots, Sky Marcher,
Squyres Devotion.
Yeah, something like that. All right, so we got a nice one there. That was a pretty good pack. Let's get into this. What do we want to start off with from kind of a bigger picture perspective?
So this is the kind of set re-review / Ixalan, original Ixalan, kind of like winners and losers. And what we want to look at, kind of timely considering we just talked about the list of overrated and underrated cards, is what does this format look like now? How is that a little different from our expectations? Though more importantly, what does it look like now? Like we're not going to harp too much on whether we got things right or wrong, because I don't think that matters as much as looking at where things are and how to approach them.
Right.
But it is useful to kind of investigate things that would lead you to making these evaluations. Mm-hmm. And then, so we're going to talk about kind of where this format is and some of the things that surprised us, especially since this is one of the last, I think the last format that you start with 3 of a pack and then you go to 2 of a new pack plus 1 of the old pack.
Yeah, Dominaria's next, and that one's going to be a standalone.
Yeah. So this did change. So it's our last chance to look at an old set and say, here's the cards that changed. So I think that's interesting. Also, that part really is helpful for people who may not have reevaluated their cards, because it's very important to look at the difference of Ixalan cards, because if you're stuck in the mindset of, thinking Bishop Soldier and Territorial Hammerskull are great, these are 2 of the cards I have on the overrated list, you're going to run into some problems, I think, because those cards are less good. Let's start by taking a look at kind of the broad strokes of where Rivals led this format and why that affected all, and how that affected all these card evaluations.
It led it to the promised land, Luis.
It did. And this is with an eye to how you can evaluate the cards now, especially cards you may not be sure about, or cards you're like, I've been liking this card more or less than I thought. So this card at the base level, like if I do like 1 sentence summary, it compared to the triple Ixalan format, it is slower, more colors, more expensive cards. That's not a complete sentence or not a properly formatted one, but it's slower. You can play more colors and put more expensive cards in your deck. And so what that means is that 2-drops aren't as critical. The good 2-drops are still good, and we have some of these on our cards that are better than we thought. But we have cards like Raptor Companion, which I think is like nigh unplayable now. Like I think that card is just not good. You're unhappy if you have it in your deck.
Hate it.
Tribal is much less of a focus. So there are tribal decks. Like, yes, you're going to play against merfolk or vampires or dinosaurs or pirates and feel like you're playing against those decks. But you're also going to play against a black-white deck who you're going to probably like mentally think, I'm playing against vampires. But then at the end of the match, you play 3 games and someone's going to be like, so how many vampire tribal cards did you play against? You're going to think, and you're going to be like, I guess they put a counter with Sanctum Glorifier on once.
Right. That was their, yeah. And we noticed this, by the way, when we were early in the format, that it tends to be 2-card interactions rather than, the whole board being affected, that kind of thing.
Right. The color pairs that are good have broadened, because it used to be that not very many of the color pairs were actually good. And it was very on tribal lines, especially with dinosaurs kind of getting the short end of the stick. But now I think all 10 are draftable, 9 are good. Like I think green-black is not great. And red-white maybe after
or
that.
green-black carried over from Ixalan as being pretty
bad.
Bad.
There's just not a whole lot of reason to be there. But I think they're all a lot better than they were before. Like it was the power's more distributed rather than concentrated. The Dino decks have a broader range. There are more different Dino decks, and the Dino decks are better. They were one of the beneficiaries of the slower cards and more expensive cards and more colors are better. Like that whole paradigm shift really helped the Dino deck that is, first of all, based in 3 colors. Second of all, has a bunch of ramp cards and a bunch of 6+ mana cards.
Yeah, for sure.
And then another thing, which is related to the fact that things are a little slower, is sideboard cards are a lot more important. Partially because the bombs have gotten better. The bombs in Rivals, I think, is one of the things people tend not to like, or at least they say they don't like. But, when they're the one with the Tetsumaki, they don't tend to complain very much.
All of a sudden there's a picture on Twitter, yeah.
Yeah. So, you picking up cards like Dark Inquiry is actually one of my favorite. This is the Tuna Black, look at their hand and make them discard a card. Negate, Plummet, Cancel. Like these are all cards I think that not only has their stock gone up, they're actually important, and you should prioritize having 2 or 3 of them, because that will make your deck a lot better in the 2 of the 3 games you play, in most matches.
Right.
So with that, kind of setting the stage, let's look back at some of the cards that we were either too high or too low on, and kind of why and how they fit in now.
Okay.
The first category is Ascend cards. And, I put like a plus sign, a minus sign, or multiple. And with Ascend cards, I have 2 plus signs next to it, which means I think that we ended up now being a lot higher than we were initially.
Absolutely. Yeah. 100, like that I think is the biggest swing.
Like if you want to look at like, categorical errors we made, undervaluing Ascend, I think, was the biggest one.
Mm-hmm.
I do want to put some caveats on there. I'm not saying we thought that all the Ascend cards were unplayable garbage, and
not at all. No.
And we did talk about how you wanted cards that were good when you ascended, but the biggest thing was ascending. It's not that it was necessarily just easier; it's that the format was more conducive to ascend. Yes. And we again were our kind of our calibration was too much on like this format is really fast. So cards like Snowborn Sentry, though, 1 mana 0/3 ascend +3/+0, like we thought this card was bad and like unplayable, and I think it's actually like a solid card you'll put in your deck more often than not.
Yeah, I think Snowborn Sentry is probably the headliner for this, right? Because that was one that we really dismissed.
Maybe Kumena's Awakening, the 2 blue ascend Howling Mine, but if you have ascended, it's just for you. Like that card, we again thought was like very bad, but I think it's actually very good. So this went from something that you actively don't want in your deck, like a D, to like I think like a solid B.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And it's funny, I remember thinking, if not saying, if Kumena's Awakening is good, then we're going to be happy.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And it's true. It is true. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so we have cards like Secrets of the Golden Cities, Slippery Scoundrel, cards which were like, the front end of these cards not that exciting, and the back end of these cards not that huge of an upgrade, but it turns out that the back end was on often enough that even though it didn't look insane, it still was quite good. Mm-hmm. And then our finishers like Dusk Charger, for example, the horse that's 4 mana 3/3 is really a 5/5. Like that card is a go-to finisher for a lot of decks, and a reason that you don't even have to play Tribal Vampires. Like you just get a 4 mana 5/5 a lot of the time.
Yeah, and that was another one that we were mediocre on, right? We just thought, like I remember thinking and even saying, well, it's a 3/3 for 4, which you're not that happy with. And then if the game goes to this long board state, your benefit is that it's a 5/5, which is pretty good, but not a hammer. It kind of felt mediocre on both ends. But yeah, it's held up. It's same thing with the Sentry.
And then you have other cards like Vona's Hunger, Stormfleet Swashbuckler, Resplendent Griffin. Basically all the cards with Ascend, I think you would notch them up between 1 and 2 plus signs, whatever that metric is.
Where were you at on Vona's Hunger, by the way?
So I still think it's probably worse than Impale or Moment of Craving, but
I agree.
Once you have a good controlling deck, I would want to pick this up as and have it be like one of your pseudo finishers where you stall the board with your Sun-Crested Pterodons and Sailor Means, and then just cast this, kill 3 other creatures.
Yeah, I've been in the same situation.
It is highly variable, like how good it is. So I'll just take Impale over it. Still, it's not a huge bomb.
Right.
A big category that we ended up being, I think, are much lower on now, and you should draft much lower, are Merfolk cards. These I have a minus sign next to them because Merfolk is a less consistent strategy. We talked about this in one of the first episodes after the set. We started playing the set. Merfolk is less consistent, and that means that the payoff cards are as good as they look in terms of what they do. Like Deep-Root Elite, whenever you play a Merfolk, get a ++1 counter, or Merfolk Mistbinder, all your Merfolk have +1/+1. Like this card in a deck full of Merfolk is exactly as good as we thought it would be, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The problem is the deck full of Merfolk part, that doesn't come up as often. No. So your evaluation of this card should therefore change. And I'm like, in Triple Ixalan, you would never take a common removal spell over a Merfolk Mistbinder if like one was just magically in your pack. Mm-hmm. But in Rivals, I mean, I'm going to take a removal spell over a Merfolk Mistbinder because there's just no reason to assume that Merfolk's going to work out even like 60% of the time.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? Is that you're taking risk on two sides. You're taking it during the draft portion that you even end up with the deck. And then the deck also tends to play out in a somewhat variable way because you end up having to play some kind of junkers, right? You don't get those big payoffs. We talk about the common payoffs like from Ixalan, and you don't get those. You don't get your River Herald Spoon and stuff. And you end up having to run some Jade Bearers, which are like fine. You end up having, you're running the Mist-Cloaked Herald sometimes, and those are fine too, except for when it doesn't kind of work out, right? Like when your draw doesn't line up really the way you want. You can often have these draws where you're staring down at like 2 of these 1-drops and no real way to augment them. And that's not good, right? Where if you look at the other types of decks, even the tribal decks, I'm not even talking about like the 3-color plus, decks. I'm just talking about like vampires or something like that, which there's not even that much synergy there. As Louis said before, you still can just play those cards and they tend to just hold their own a lot better. So to me, it's like you're taking on risk on 2 levels, and the draft risk is really big because if God forbid there's somebody else at the table drafting Merfolk, you're screwed. I mean, you are not in good position at that point.
Yeah, and that is really a reason that I'm shying away from taking these cards. And I think that all the Merfolk cards should be downgraded as a result. What you should do, though, is don't throw these cards in the garbage. Just realize that if you're in a position to take a 4th or 5th pick Merfolk Mistbinder, which happens in pack 1 now, be aware that maybe it's the right time. Because if Merfolk is open, it's still going to be very good. If you're the only Merfolk player at the table, you're going to get paid off. But if there's ever a second one, you end up in a pretty bad spot.
Yeah, I like being patient with that and waiting. Also, I like taking the more middle ground cards in the early part. You know, the Jungleborn Pioneer specifically is a card that I like in multiple decks. And, you know, that's one that I'm pretty happy to pick up early. And then, like you said, you get a couple of real signal, you know, like a late Mistbinder is a real signal. And then I think it's good to move in.
So those are like the two big categories of cards, which I think that we want to talk about. But there's a bunch of individual cards which are worth mentioning.
All right. What do you want to talk about?
So Everdawn Champion, the 1 white 2/2 that doesn't take combat damage.
Mm-hmm.
I've been very unimpressed with this card.
Me too. Why though? I can't figure out why I don't like it, but I've never, ever cared about that card for the whole format.
It's a combination of being a little hard to cast, which does come up, and being small enough that your opponent either goes around it or just uses any removal spell on it. It's not a good aggressive card because they can either take 2, and that's not a big deal, and it can't punch through very much, and it has no tribal component. So besides putting Tillinolly's Crown on it, which is a Mondo combo, I have been pretty unhappy with this card in my deck. So it's not a card I like playing very often, and it's a card which, sure, I'll side in, you know, depending on what the matchup looks like, but often not start.
Yeah, I think another problem that I have with it, or maybe the reason why I don't care about it is, you know, if I say Sailor of Means and you play that thing, I'm just like, LOL, you know, like it doesn't do anything. Now, if you're racing or you've got a bunch of small creatures that are trying to get it on the ground, okay, then that thing could be a problem. I just don't do that very often in this format. So that's probably why.
There is, however, a 3-mana 2/2 white creature I do like, which is Legion Conquistador. And especially since you can have the opportunity to grab them in Ixalan still, I'm pretty happy with this card. It's just good value to have like 3 of these because they do grind the game out nicely and they combine well with some of the other cards in the format. They help you get Ascend. It's funny looking at how bad Everdawn Champion feels and how good Legion Conquistador feels, but the fact that you're getting multiple cards out of this, which actually add up to a good amount of power and toughness, and that it trades against opposing removal spells so much better. Like there are just decks that have 7 or 8 removal spells in them. And against those decks, Legion Conquistador is so much better than Everdawn Champion. So I have been pretty happy with Legion Conquistador.
What other ones stand out?
Another one that has gone down in our estimation severely is Radiant Destiny, the 2 and a white, choose a tribe. Yeah. That tribe gets +1/+1 and City's Blessing Vigilance. It turns out this format's not that tribal. So the dreams of having 14 of the same creature are just not really that realistic. And as a result, Radiant Destiny ends up pumping like half your creatures, which generally not good enough. So unless you're super tribal, which doesn't happen all that often, this isn't a very good card. And I believe it's a little overrated because I never see this card, which means I think people are second, third picking it, and I'm just not willing to do that.
Yeah, I'm off of that card too. Not a fan.
Suncrested Pterodon is a big winner. This card, this is the 5-mana 2/5. Yep, it is flying and vigilance if you have a dino. You don't even need a dino. It's just a 2/5 flyer, shuts down your opponent's entire board, and is exactly what I want in my defensive decks while still actually presenting a little bit of a clock in an aggressive deck. Like I've played this card in a red-white aggro deck without any shame. So I'm really high on Suncrested Pterodon. Some people have it as the second best white common. Some of that is the third best white common. This is a card that initially looked like filler, and it is most certainly not. Chicken's very filling.
I'm a big fan of the chicken now. Like seriously, like I've splashed for it once, you know, because I needed something up on the top end, and it seems to just do everything in the format as far as not only blocking but even attacking. I don't know. It's just for whatever reason, certain cards we've seen cards like this before. They just generally don't look very good, but in the right context, they can just really shine, and the chicken really does a good job. I'm a big fan of it.
Crashing Tide, the 2 and a blue sorcery bounce creature draw card. If you have a Merfolk, it's an instant. This card is still good. Like, look, I'm not saying don't put this card in your deck, but it looked great. And the fact that the format's a little slower and there are actually blue decks that aren't trying to beat down means that this is a card I've lowered in my priority order, right? I'll take Sailor of Means over this card without a second thought. And at the beginning, this card looked so much better.
Yeah, for sure.
Similarly, Hornswoggle, 2 blue, counter a creature, put a treasure into play. This looks like a card that we were never going to play, and now is a card I main deck, about half the time. But it's a real card. It's a card that you can look at, put in your deck, and not feel like you made a huge mistake.
No, and it's such a pain when somebody gets you with it, because you do rely on these bombs in many ways, right? Like there's a lot of building around and a lot of support cards and stuff. And then you're like, all right, here's Azor the Lawbringer. And they're like Hornswoggle. You're like, what? You just feel robbed, I found that card to be much better than I thought. Yeah,
it trades up very nicely for against opposing cards that are very good, which is always a pretty sweet feeling.
Yeah, for sure.
Speaking of the man of the hour, Sailor of Means, this is a card we basically have had multiple episodes just about, and it's a card that I think is quite strong and also enables an entire deck archetype, which is always a pretty cool place to be, especially for a card which was fairly unremarkable in Ixalan.
Yeah. I love that we get it for all 3 packs, right? Like that's a huge bonus. And on top of it, it does every single thing that you want. I'm a big fan. We build entire decks around one single card, and this is it. It just unlocks the door for so much stuff. And the funny part is that a good portion of my Sailor of Means decks contain very low numbers of Sailor of Means. It kind of led me down a path that led me realize that I could do a lot, and you don't actually need specifically Sailor of Means. It just happens to be the best option, but there's others as well.
So next one we got is Soul of the Currents.
You did not get me either, did you?
Hmm?
Did you get me? You didn't get me.
What are you talking about?
Soul of the Rapids. I know what this card is. We have a bet on this.
Oh, well, I don't think we ever went back and listened to the last episode.
I didn't go back and listen, no, but I haven't heard anything from you, so I figure that means I probably got there.
Well, I don't think either of us did, but we'll go back and find out.
Okay. Luis thinks he got me to say Soul of the Currents like for real on the show. I don't know if I did though.
So this is a card which didn't look very good. We were hoping it wouldn't be good, and it is good though not great. Basically, it's not playable by itself very often. If you're really hard up for a win condition, you could do worse. But in conjunction with Mark of the Vampire or Squyres Devotion, or if you're really desperate, Swashbuckling, this is a finisher. And if I have an aura, I'll tend to play a Soul of the Currents, and if I don't, then I won't. But it's a card I'm a little higher on than in the set review, though I'm still not like taking this card over almost anything. You tend to pick one up without working very hard.
Yeah, for Soul of the Rapids, I also have it a little bit higher. My thinking is that it's interchangeable. I put it in air quotes, but win condition. It's like a 5-drop that can win the game at some point, and I view it along the same lines as like a Windstrider or something like that. It's fine. It's replaceable, but fine, which is better than I thought it would be. Yeah.
So a card we mentioned earlier, Dark Inquiry. I don't think it's embarrassing to main deck this card, and I like having access to them in the sideboard, and I boarded up to like 2 at the most. I've never boarded up to 3, but I've had 2 in my deck post board and been happy with that configuration.
What about? Because I agree that like when people get me with that, I'm like, okay, yeah, well, that's the format we live in. But what about like Arterial Flow or the Treasure Maker one from Ixalan? Like, have you adjusted those? Because sometimes when you get into these really grindy formats, just raw card advantage. And remember, your life total isn't being pressured as often. We call these mind rots. These things go up in value typically, though. I haven't adjusted Arterial Flow. I still don't play it basically ever. Have you?
Oh, I tend to play that card, especially if I have vampires.
Oh, really? Maybe I should be looking into that.
When more people are trying to play 5 and 6 drops, then it hurts them a lot more to discard an excess land. There's just no such thing as an excess land. And when the games go longer, this kind of card does help a lot.
Yeah, no, for sure. Like the logic is there, right? Like all the pieces in place are for these cards to be good. I don't know. I just don't see them often, and I haven't really bothered to reevaluate, but I will now. I'll probably throw those in the deck every once in a while.
This show is very useful for even people on the show.
Oh, look at this.
Next up, we have Tetsumaki, Primal Death. It has enough plus signs that I can't even count. I mostly am saying we thought this card was like one of the dumbest cards we ever laid eyes on, but somehow it's dumber than that. And I just want to lodge a formal complaint while we're here.
All right, this spotlight has been put on Tetsumaki, and all now know how dumb that card really is. Okay, so I have to ask then: does it crack top 5, top 10 all-time limited cards?
Definitely top 10. I don't know if it makes the top 5. It's in the Hall of Fame though. Like
Agreed.
One of the things I do when I do the written reviews, right, is I have a limited scale from 1 to 5 or 0 to 5, and I have some cards I've retired I've put in the Hall of Fame. These are cards like Wingmate Rock, Pack Rat, Azores Gateway, and Tetsumaki would also go there. Like these are cards that are above a 5.0. They're not really useful to rate. There's no comparison. At one point I was blue-green and I opened Tetsumaki in pack 2 and I took Tetsumaki. I took 3 more black cards that pack and ended up playing blue splashing, like basically blue with like Dreg, a bunch of Tetsumaki, a couple other good black cards and some Dregs. And it was, I think, much better than whatever direction I was going to go in.
So funny.
The card is just worth, like your win shares when this card is in your deck, they just go up by so much, right? It's absurd. So,
do you have it? One more question on it. Do you have it higher or lower on the all-time rankings than Grave Titan?
I think
it's right in that Titan area.
I think Grave Titan is better because Grave Titan will win you the game on 6 mana, whereas sometimes Tetsumaki is a little slower. Like. Especially when you draw Tetsumaki, not even when you draw it on turn 6 exactly, but sometimes you draw Tetsumaki and you're like, well, I need to play my 4 and 5 drop just to be in this game. So I can't really reveal Tetsumaki. I don't have time to do that. Whereas Grave Titan, you tap 6 and cast it and it kind of ends things. But it's so close that it doesn't really matter because some games you'll die to flyers and Tetsumaki would have saved you.
Sure. All right. That was just for fun anyway. But all right, what's next? Oh, yeah, definitely the next one.
Yeah, one last thing is comparing Tetsumaki to Grave Titan is they're awesome. So close. Yeah, they're so close that I'm happy either way. It's kind of like I don't know.
You would take either one in your limited deck.
Yeah. It's kind of like Moment of Craving and Ravenous Chupacabra. Like they're both just so good that like you're just really happy when you get to first pick one of them.
You could. I was thinking you were going to spring it on me during the Crack-a-Pack, but I guess you had other plans. All right, next card.
Voracious Vampire, 2 and a black, 2/2 menace. Vampire gives one of your vampires +1/+1 menace when it comes into play.
Sucks.
This card sucks. It's just a good aggressive card, but
yep.
There's just not that much support for it. And look, if you play this card,
Sworn Vampire either, by the way, the 1 and a black 2/2 that enters the battlefield tapped, and you can get it back when you gain life. These cards, these kind of grindy vampire cards, have just proven really mediocre.
Yeah, it's just not. Well, they're more on the aggressive side, and it's just not really what it's about.
Totally. Yeah.
Forerunner of the Empire, the 3 in a red 1/3 goes and puts a dinosaur on top of your deck, and when you play a dinosaur, ping everything for 1, or you may ping everything for 1. This card is awesome. It's much better than it looks. It's in a class so far above the other Forerunners that it might not even. It's not even worth comparing them. It's like Ravenous Chupacabra, Moment of Craving. There's just no comparison. It's just not even close. You'd have to be.
Damn it! No. Man.
No, but Forerunner of the Empire, because not only does it tutor for your best dinosaur, and there's a lot of really good dinos, it also combos with a lot of them. Like tutoring up Needletooth Raptors, of course, the dream, but even just tutoring up, a good dino
within rage,
and then playing a Frill Despoter and ping, and they take an extra 2, or just clearing out your opponent's 1 and 2 toughness creatures if you get to double dino, or just going and getting your Colossal Dreadmaw when you need a 6/6. There's also a cycle of rare Elder Dino bombs, and getting to tutor up your Galta is just like, oh, look, you opened a 10 out of 10, or 12 out of 12 in this case. and this card, which is already a very good card, Forerunner of the Empire, lets you tutor for, your ridiculous bomb. So I think Forerunner of the Empire is just much better than it looks. The other Forerunners are all good. We didn't say any of them were bad, but this one's not remotely close, and it's one of the ones I think is like a premium uncommon. We had it better than all the commons.
Here's our hint, right? You and I, we do this stuff for a living, right? We evaluate these cards and that kind of stuff. It seemed underpowered compared to the others based on the stats. It's a 4 mana 1/3 that's not even in the tribe that it's going to get. Should that have been a red flag for us to go, now wait a minute? Why did they bump this down to a 1/3, right? Like all these other cards are fine. They're 2/2s for 3, or, the Merfolk one gets huge or whatever. But like this one just feels like it was a 3/3. And they were like, oh, well, this is way too good. And they started bumping it down, and maybe we should have reverse engineered that,
Yeah, maybe. Another card, which I actually am still not 100% sure where it lands, is Form of the Dinosaur. But I'm
wow, look, this is one of the most controversial cards in the set.
So I still think that it's got promise in the right deck. Like I have, seen people put this to good use in an aggressive deck. It has been really bad in the kind of more mid-rangey control decks. So on balance, I'm lower on it than initial. I thought this card was good. It is not. Mm-hmm. But there are decks where this card will be strong. So it's kind of confusing. I don't think you can.
I still have it as bad. Here's what I mean. So there was a discussion actually in your team's testing group about this card, and like Ben or somebody was saying, look, here's some conditions where I think it's good. If your deck can play lands consistently, if it is looking to be assertive, and if it has like a good curve out behind it, then Form of the Dinosaur can be really good. And I'm like, okay, that makes sense. And I can see that, right? Like it clears away the last few blockers, you kill them, etc. But the test that I put it up against is, I said, compare it to Colossal Dreadmaw, which everybody thinks is like pretty good card, right? Fine 6-drop. It compares in some cases about the same, right? Where if you did that same thing where you curved up to 6 and you had an assertive start, a Colossal Dreadmaw is a hammer, right? Like your opponent is really not going to be able to beat that very often. It's going to be really difficult for them to beat. Now, Form of the Dinosaur, arguably a little bit better, like maybe, but in all the other scenarios, Form of the Dinosaur is a card that there's times when you can't even play it from your hand, right? Like if you're way behind, you can play it and you will get to kill something big on their side, but you take that damage and then they get to hit you with everything. It can get out of hand and you can lose to it very easily, lose to your own Form of the Dinosaur very easily. So I don't know. For me, it's like, if there's enough scenarios where a common, just like a common that people kind of shrug at and don't really talk about, is better than it, I'm really skeptical about how narrow the case is where this card's like worth putting in your deck.
I think that's kind of where I've landed, where I say it is mostly bad, but it has some promise. The question is, will we ever find out when it has promise? And the answer is we might not. Maybe it's just bad.
Okay.
So I'm not dying on this hill. Like I'm not going to defend this card to the death. I think it is powerful. It has power in it. Like look at this card. It is powerful.
Gain 11 life, start killing your opponent's creatures, etc. is a real big game.
How do you use that? And it's I don't really know. The next one's actually kind of controversial too. It's Mutiny. This is red. One of your opponent's creatures punches one of their other creatures. Oh
yeah, this is another one that Dustin said he was way down on.
I'm not way down on it, but
I'm not either.
Where we ended up on this was it is a lot better in control decks than it is in aggro decks.
Okay, explain.
Aggro decks frequently care about their biggest creature and getting past it, and Mutiny does not help that, right? If they're brickwalling your 3/3s with a 4/4 and they also have a 2/2 in play, it doesn't help to kill the 2/2. Also, it's not as good when you're a little faster because your opponent's not going to have very many creatures out, right? They're going to spend one turn playing a creature and maybe play a removal spell, or you remove their first creature, they play a second one, and in either case, Mutiny doesn't do anything. In a control deck, where I have liked it a little more, it's because, first of all, you just want to not get too far behind on board overall, and your opponents, who are generally more aggressive than you, play multiple things. You just get to kill one. You don't care what you kill. You just spent 1 mana to kill a card, and that is good. Like against a deck playing, Kitesail Corsair, right? The 2/1 flyer.
Yeah, you want Mutiny.
Yeah, Mutiny is great. And against Red Black Pirates, this card is great. Against Vampires, the card is just okay because, the Exultant Sky Marcher is a 2/3 with flying, and that's a little harder to kill. Yeah. But if you're playing the Sailor of Means type deck that is going to get behind, has card draw, and you have red and Mutiny, Mutiny I think is going to do okay for you. Like it's going to be able to pick off some of the things. In no case is this card great. It very infrequently kills a bomb. Like yes, it can kill a Merfolk Mistbinder because that's also a bomb while being small. But no, this card isn't killing their 3/3 flyer very often, or their Champion of Dusk or whatever card is annoying you. But
one of the ways I thought. Go ahead.
I was going to say, in a deck that frequently is behind and just wants to not be behind, this card does its job.
Yeah, the way I thought of it was something along the lines of like a sorcery speed shock, like do 2 damage, something. Maybe it's 1, maybe it's 2, but it basically every time I've ever cast it, it's killed something. And I don't know what more I really want from a 1 mana removal spell in this day and age. Like obviously I'd rather have Reckless Rage, right? But if I'm, going to play this, like, what do I expect this thing to kill? Like, I don't really like grasp the argument of, well, it doesn't kill the big creature that you need to get through. So what are you going to sub in another removal spell for Mutiny? Like that's not the question you have. If you have, an extra Bombard laying around, you're going to play that over your Mutiny. Obviously it's way better, but what is the role of a
who has
1 mana removal
laying around?
Exactly. Right. So what's the role of a 1 mana removal spell? It's to kill a small creature. Mutiny usually kills a small creature. So if you're in the business of killing something small, I like a Mutiny in my deck.
Business is good. Part of where I think people misevaluate cards like this is when their expectations are higher.
Yes.
It's like, yes, Mutiny is not a premium removal spell, but it never. Who said it was supposed to be? It never was.
Right, it's 1 red mana. Like you don't get Lightning Bolt, man.
Right. It's a mediocre card that you take in the middle of the pack, but I do think it is playable in the right deck. It's not unplayable.
Same. I agree.
Speaking of cards which are a little better, Field Despoter, the 2 and a red 3/2 that pings them for 2 on Enrage.
Yep.
This card is better. Even if the format's less aggressive, I still find this card to be a good reason to be red. It's one of the good aggressive red 2-drops that's just fine in a mid-range deck. A lot of ways to trigger it. It's a lot better than Ravenous Daggertooth, the gain 2 Enrage card, and I think that comparison probably hurt it, even though the cards aren't exactly connected.
Yeah, it passes the Sealer of Means test as well.
Oh, yeah. Shake the Foundations, so somewhat on topic too. 2 and a red, deal 1 to each creature without flying, draw a card at instant speed. This card has just been good. It often will just pick something off. The opportunity cost is low because it cycles, and it triggers your Enrage. So I like this card as well. Mm-hmm. Stampeding Horncrest. This is a controversial one, though I don't know why it's controversial. It's so good.
I'm still not on this card. I don't understand why you like it so much.
I told Raptor, because I know he doesn't listen to the show.
Is he mad at me now?
Yeah, he's mad at you. Like he thinks that you're underrating his boy, the Horncrest.
All respect lost. All right, fair enough. I still just don't see it, man. I like the card's fine,
but it doesn't have eyes if you look at the art. So
it just charges in blindly.
Look at the art. Either it doesn't have eyes or its eyes are so tiny.
Oh, you're right.
Isn't that nonsense?
Oh, that's funny. I guess they just unleash it. Oh, that's great.
But I think this card is better.
You really like it, right?
You think this card is worse, so I'm going to give it a plus minus.
No, I don't think it's worse. I think it's probably better than I thought it was, but the same or slightly better. Like I still view it as basically replaceable random 5-drop in a dinosaur deck. Like,
yeah, I think
charging Monster Dawn. This is not
Monstrosaur. I think it is better.
Monstrosaur, thank you. Thank
you. You hinted at this next card earlier in the Crack a Pack. Hardy Veteran, the 2-mana 2/4. Yeah. Just not that good at punching through. The format's not as much about this anymore. And besides the combo with Hunt the Weak, which is a good combo, or Till and Ollie's Crown, I have been largely unimpressed by this card. It's just not really what I want my green decks to be doing. I either want a Focus Merfolk deck or a Dinosaur Ramp deck. I don't really want like green-black play 2-drops they don't have evasion.
Right. And think about it like this, right? As the format has slowed, we want fewer 2-drops in general, and we're not attacking as much.
Yeah.
Hardy Veteran is good on attacks and as a 2-drop. These are both metrics that we value lower. So, as you might imagine, we value Hardy Veteran lower.
Zakama Primal Calamity is a card I'm a lot higher on now.
Yeah. I love that guy now.
This card is actually quite playable, and in more decks than you might even think. You can play it with islands in your deck. You can play it in a Dino Ramp deck with like Night of the
it's so sweet.
It's just a great card. So
I love this card. I'm just glad they made it.
Our team had this card very high, like above most of all the commons and most of the uncommons.
Really?
That's
really great. See, like that's another good litmus test for the format.
Well, I think it's valuable to know. Like we all thought that like you should take this. Well, not every single person was on board with this, but I will be taking this card over Impale, and I was not the only one. So,
that's great. I love hearing that. Yeah, card is so sweet. What about this last one?
Path of Metal, the card which I nailed completely.
You don't even know what it does.
When you grilled me on it, and it was It is a card which I was much more impressed with after seeing it in action a couple times. It's a weird card. It's hard to draft around, but there's a lot of cards that you could put in your deck that have these abilities. And if you do flip the card, it is very important or not very powerful, even if I didn't know it was legendary. I did know.
And that you choose a creature at random that attacked this turn.
All right. Looks
you can do it on your end step if you want.
Anyway, it looks like there's a couple more entries here.
Yeah, one of them was Majestic Helios, which we weren't super high on, but I think, at least for me, I thought, yeah, I could see this thing doing a thing, picking up a dinosaur and whatever. Nope. It's ended up being real stinker. That's a 3 and a white 2/2 flying dinosaur, and when it attacks, you can have another dinosaur get flying until end of turn. And I have yet to see, I don't think I've even seen a dinosaur take to the skies alongside a Majestic Helios, and I value it extremely lowly. So that one's dumped down a bunch for me. Real simple, but Recover.
I do like Recover a lot.
Yeah, Recover is just a card that is really easy to overlook. They have these, what are these type of cards called?
Cantrips?
No, the ones that get a creature back from your yard to your hand.
Raised Deads.
Like Raised Deads, yeah. These Raised Dead effects are generally mediocre minus, right? Like if you have a bomb, maybe you want it, or these type of things. But like you said, they made it into a cantrip with Recover. You get to just draw a card off of it, and you're getting the creature. And if the game goes long enough, or if you have bombs, you can do that. And these games just do. And that is just a fact. And so Recover is way higher for me than I had it before. Now I like it quite a bit. One of the big bombs that I've been kind of keeping an eye on and that I haven't really loved is Elenda. That's her name, right?
The Dusk Rose.
The Dusk Rose. Yeah, that's a 2 white black 1/1 lifelinker. And whenever another creature dies, you put a counter on it. And when she dies, you get that many equal to you get 1/1 lifelinking vampires equal to her power. It's not like a terrible card, I don't think, but I have found that every time my opponent casts it, at first I'm like, oh crap. And then I just realize it never does anything. Like I can completely ignore it for multiple turns because it's just a 1/1 and maybe it becomes a 2/2 or something, or a 3/3 if two creatures trade off or whatever. But it takes so long to get going. And then I'm just end up playing something stupid on it, like bouncing it or, water knotting it or whatever. And it's just like, it is not a bomb, right? Maybe it's an okay card in a vampire deck, but I have it reduced down as far as bombs go. One that I'm even higher on than before is Profaned Procession, which I think we gave an A, but I just think this card is absolutely the stones. I love this card.
It's an A+. It's not quite Hall of Fame level, but in terms of not only the game effect it has, but the despair it causes your opponents, it is unmatched.
Oh, yeah. Oh, they just sit there and have to stare at it. So I love that one. And then another one that we were not 100% sure on during the set review, but that I ended up liking a lot is Azores Gateway. That's the 2 mana. It's like a loot rock. It's a legendary artifact. One tap, draw a card, and then exile a card from your hand. And then there's a whole bunch of nonsense about flipping it, but I've never even flipped it. I never even tried to. In fact, I probably would avoid doing it. But I just found loot
at the Pro Tour, but I did not win that game.
Oh no!
I was getting beaten down by Soul Occurrence with Squyres Devotion on it.
I heard that, by the way. It adds mana equal to your life total, right?
Yep. X mana so you can your life total of any one color.
Yeah, it's a really cool card. But the key here is that it's colorless, so it goes into these multicolored decks just wherever you want them to be. And 1 tap to loot is actually quite well worth it in a slower format. So I like Azores Gateway quite a bit too.
So those are the cards that we kind of wrapped up here on Rivals, but we're going to again go back and touch on Ixalan cards. This is from the set Ixalan.
Just from Ixalan, right?
Because revaluing these is very important. Some of the cards that have lost value, that are overrated now, and cards I think you should adjust downwards are Bishop, Soldier, Raptor Companion, and Territorial Hammerskull. All 3 of these white aggressive creatures are just less good now because you just don't need these early plays. And in the case of Hammerskull, it has less support. This card got really good in multiples and was really good if you were curving out. But as fewer decks are about that exactly, then the Hammerskull just keeps getting bogged down. Look, this card is good still. You'll still put it in your decks, but no longer should you be taking Hammerskull over like Pious Interdiction, which was a pick you would most of the time make in Ixalan. And it's important to kind of readjust your value there.
Yeah, and you can see the theme with all 3 of these cards, right? They're all looking to get in, and they're all like looking to race or whatever, and that's just not the name of the game anymore.
The next two are also a pair. It's Blight Keeper, the 1/1 flyer for a black, and Swashbuckling, the enchantment that gets +2/+2 in haste. This was a frequent combo. I actually comboed this off myself at the PT that was all Rivals or all Ixalan. But yeah, you're just really not looking to do this anymore, and you don't need a 1-drop anymore as much. And the auras that don't provide lifelink, I think, are a little less good. So
this all-in auras deck seems to be just gone now.
Yeah, One with the Wind is still a powerful card. In your aggressive decks, you should still play it, but Swashbuckling is a lot worse. You put the next card on the list. I'm not sure why. Hostage Taker?
I did not put Hostage Taker on this list.
Oh, no, this card's still stupid. You should still take it.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's like, this might still be, it may have lost its crown as best card in the block, but it also might not have.
It's still not as good as Tetsumaki, but it is the best card in Ixalan. Pirate's Cutlass.
Hostage Taker, what is that doing in here?
Pirate's Cutlass has gotten worse. Like, this card is still good, but when the format is less about your 2/2s banging into their 2/2s, the +2/+1 bonus is less important.
Yeah.
But
like you said, still good, right? It still gets you through this.
Like, you're still going to play this, especially in a Pirates deck, but it's when there's more 2/5s and 6/6s running around, then giving your 2/2 +2/+1 is just a lot less impressive. So I'm lower on Pirates Cutlass. I'll still play it, but I'm definitely taking removal over Cutlass unless my deck is like heavy on Pirates or very aggressive.
Yeah, the chicken takes another victim.
So white, and so that those are the cards which have dramatically changed in value downwards. There are the aggressive cards in general, I think, are a little worse. So just keep that in mind. But those are the ones where, like, I think it is important to note that, like, Territor, Hammerskull, and Pirates Cutlass especially are worse because those were like premium cards before. One
I'm curious about: where do you have Ranging Raptors?
I like that card still. This is the 2 and a green 2/3 that has Enrage, get a land.
Digging it.
Yeah, and there's more ways to trigger Enrage, so you get to to go off like a card which 2 cards which I think get better. I'll just skip to those is Dual Shot and Rile. Dual Shot because it picks off some nice 1 toughness creatures the opponent has while also being an Enrage trigger, and Rile, which is just an Enrage trigger, but there's more payoffs and better payoffs than there were before.
Dual Shot, by the way, is main deckable now. I start
the first Dual Shot at this point.
Yeah.
Some other cards that are underrated are Bellowing Aegisaur, the 3/5 Enrage, give your whole squad +1/+1 for a lot of the same reasons.
Yep.
And Kinjali's Collar, the 1 mana 0/3 that makes your dinosaurs cheaper. It's
interesting. I haven't invested that one.
Well, white green dinos, I think, is now a playable deck. It just wasn't before. So
I see.
I'm not too unhappy if I have Kinjali's Collar at this point. Legion Conquistador, of course, is the same.
Still good. Yep.
Pterodon Knight is interesting. It's a 4 mana 3/3 flying if you have a dino. I've actually been playing this card more because when the board stalls, having a flyer is important. The dinos tend to survive more often, and just a 3/3 flyer does eventually end the game. All
right, I'll adjust on that one. That's one that I think other people have consistently valued a little bit higher than I have. But everything you said makes sense. That seems better.
Yeah, flying's great. Make sure it doesn't get ambushed by them killing your only dino.
Yep.
Deep Root Waters is an interesting one. So look, I do think Merfolk is worse, but this is the aura that gives you a 1 on hexproof when you play a Merfolk. I've had a couple decks where Deep Root Waters actually gets there because the format's a little bit slower and you have more ways to pump all your Merfolk now. So
I have too. Yeah. I hated Deep Root Waters
this card I thought was
in Triple Ixalan. Yeah, I put it in my deck. I have played a Deep Root Waters. I scratched it off of the bucket list. And, like you said, there's a lot of ways to get counters. I had a Deep Root Elite, and I had one other thing that I can't remember. But I was going off. I mean, it was like if I could get that thing going, and I did once, it was stupid. I mean, it actually more than held its own. Like, I was actually happy to have it. It wasn't like filler for me. It was like a really powerful piece of my deck. Again, it doesn't come up often, but that's a totally different look. I mean, even in a Merfolk deck, I was always advocating for cutting it. Yeah.
Unplayable card to card you should keep in the back of your mind is kind of the adjustment I make. I'm not saying you should take this card highly. Right. I like Storm Sculptor a lot more too. Speaking of Merfolk, this is the 3/2 unblockable that bounces on your creatures. First of all, there's now Water Knot and Luminous Bonds as common removal spells, and this rescues your creatures from those. The format's also a little slower, and this breaks through board stalls, lets you reuse enter the battlefield abilities. I have liked Storm Sculptor, and I've found myself playing it even in like non-Merfolk decks as a decent finisher.
Me too. The first one, I'm always like, sure, I'll have time. The thing was always the time. You always felt like you were under too much pressure to play that card. It was too fragile. Now you actually have the time.
Another card which plays off of the Luminous Bonds and Whatnot is Costly Plunder, the 1 in a black sack creature artifact to draw 2. This is more of a sideboard card still, but
you're still not main decking.
No, okay. I'm not. But it's a card you can side in against these auras as a way to just get some value. Speaking of value, I actually like Grim Captain's Call now. This is the 2 in a black.
Oh, really? Oh, I haven't had it since the
Brave Dead.
That would be great.
Yeah, Vampire, Merfolk, Pirate, and Dinosaur. There's just more decks that are more colors and more tribes, and I've played this as a draw for a bunch of times. I've never gotten the full but
I haven't either. But.
I've gotten back, you can get back your like Sailor of Means, your Sun-Crested Pterodon, and like a random Merfolk, and be pretty happy with that.
Oh, I'm loving that. Yeah, I just haven't done it, but I approve. That's great.
Lurking Chupacabra is there specifically because of Path of Discovery. I mentioned this when we talked about Green-Black last week, but if you have Path of Discovery, Lurking Chupacabra is A+.
I have a data point on that, by the way. I had a Path of Discovery, and I had 2 Wild Growth Walkers and a Jade Light Ranger, and I just got destroyed.
Oh, well.
So I think Green-Black's bad. That's my.
Yeah, I mean, I have not drafted it many times. Mark of the Vampire is still good.
Yeah.
I don't think this card's actually lost value or gained value. I just wanted to point it out that even though some of the other auras, like Swashbuckling more notably, are not as good anymore, I think Mark has retained its value.
Agreed.
So, I like it. Raider's Wake, the 3 in a black enchantment that has Raid. They discard a card. If you attack this turn and they lose 2 life whenever you discard a card, there are some decks that just get wrecked by that now. Like, I already thought it was a good sideboard card in Triple Ixalan. Now it's a borderline main deck / great sideboard card. Like, there's some decks when you play a Raider's Wake on turn 4, they're just like, what? Like, they just want to scoop because they're looking at their hand. They're like, if I discard lands, I can't play my 5s and 6 drops. And if I discard spells, I'm just going to flood out or get run over. And it does 6 damage. So, that card is sweet. Angrist Marauders, 7 mana, 4/4. Your sources deal double damage. Look, this is a powerful 7-drop. The only reason it wasn't good is because Ixalan is so fast. But now that the format's slowing down, this card's actually really good. So
the effect has always been really powerful. It's just too expensive.
It wasn't the power level that was holding this back. And I especially want to mention that because the whole point of these re-reviews are when you open up your pack of Ixalan, if you've been drafting, a lot of these both formats, your eyes are just going to pass over Angrist Marauders like it wasn't even there because this card was just unplayable crap before. But you should look at it with in this new light, and you should reevaluate it. Rummaging Goblins, another card which went from I think unplayable to plausible. This is 2 in a red, 1/1 that you can tap and discard a card to draw a card. In a slower deck, which a lot of the red decks are still aggressive. So I'm still not putting this card in my deck more than like a third of the time. But a third of the time is a lot better than 0% of the time.
Yeah, I mean, I remember if you go back to Ixalan, somebody would play a Rummaging Goblin against you, and you'd go, oh, thank God, they have no idea what they're doing. And now they play it, and I'm like, ooh, that's uncomfortable. Like, I have to actually deal with that thing because they're going to get a really good long-term advantage if I don't.
Yep, and it is a card that makes your. This is why you have Dual Shot and Shake the Foundations, in your deck, opposing Rummaging Goblins.
Yeah, there you go.
Crushing Canopy, the 2 green, destroy an enchantment or a flyer. I think you can main deck this card now.
So close to main deck. Yeah, I have it still just on the other side, but like I think it wouldn't take much of an excuse for me to main deck one of these. There's just tons of targets now.
Yeah,
especially when you
water not really go a long way towards making me want to, and then Kitesail Corsair, Sun-Crested Pterodon, like
and you still get Pious Interdiction and stuff, but also there's the bombs from Rivals, right? There's Hadana's Climb.
Yeah, all the flip
that you can. Yeah, the flip cards, right?
And
Profaned Procession, like I mean, hitting one of those with a main deck Crushing Canopy, like that has to just be the best feeling in the whole world, right? Those cards are extremely difficult to beat and extremely difficult to interact with on top of it. So I don't know. I think there's something there.
I think that you should main deck it most of the time, not all the time. It just depends on if you have good removal and you don't care about flyers, then it's a lot less important. But if you're like a red green ramp deck that is like, well, I've got 1 Bombard and 1 Unfriendly Fire, but no Grazing Whiptails, you should probably main deck it.
Okay.
Speaking of which, I think Grazing Whiptail is good. It just blocks quite well. This is a 3/4 reach and is a relevant creature type. So I like the Whiptail. I also like Arguel's Bloodfast. This is the black flip card. You can pay 2 life to draw a card.
Yeah.
If your deck especially has some life gain sources and is a good controlling deck or a good aggressive deck, basically a good deck, if you have good removal, if you have good removal or a good way to put pressure on it, like don't play this in like random mid-range decks as much. But I find that I'd rather have Bloodfast in my main deck and side it out against aggro than to not main deck it.
Yeah, agreed.
Thematic Compass. This is the 2-mana artifact that you can pay 3 and tap it and search for a basic. If you have 7 lands, it flips into Squyres of Ixalan. And I think this card went from being like marginal / bad to quite good. This has gone up a lot because it's super powerful. It's just slow.
The mana fixing is great, and the Maze of Ith, air quotes type card, that the land that can prevent an attack from your opponent's best creature is absolutely great.
Yeah. So I love that. I think the card is awesome. And then lastly,
it just sucks that it's rare because you never see it. Yeah, go ahead.
Bringing up the rear, Cobbled Wings, 2 mana equipment, pay 1 to equip, gives a creature flying. Yeah, this card now is playable. If you need a way to finish your opponent, you can send your 4/2s into the air and they will eventually die. So.
Yeah. One card I wanted to ask you about before we signed off here, Dive Down. This is one that we were low on when it first came out. Then we went way high on it. And now, is it still really great, or is it worse? I
think it's still pretty great, especially if you have good creatures to protect. Like if all your creatures are bad, the Sailor Means deck sometimes just doesn't want to play it because all their creatures are interchangeable and bad. But if you have any auras, it's great. If you have high quality creatures, it's great. I think Dive Down is just a good rate card.
I agree. The removal is still ultimately relatively slow, even in Rivals, right? 4 mana sorcery, 4 mana sorcery, 3 mana sorcery speed, like a lot of slow stuff. So, All right, cool. That was fun. Lots of changes, by the way. I love that they did this because not only was I not super happy with the format before, and now I kind of am, but on top of it, we've got a lot to talk about, and we just did 2 shows back to back on the new format, and there's still more to talk about if we really wanted. So lots of stuff. For us limited fans to digest here as we have to now, make these big changes and to the entire format. I think that's really cool that Rivals did that to the format.
Yeah, it did a really good job.
Okay, that's going to do it for this one. Good show, Luis. If you want to find us on social media, I am Marshall_LR and Luis is LSV. You, of course, want to check out channelfireball.com for everything you need Magic related on the internet, including selling your cards back. I like to mention this because I think this is something that people don't know that much about, which is that you can sell your rares and cards back to Channel Fireball, and they will give you a 30% bonus if you want to trade them in for store credit, which is a screaming deal. You can get all the stuff I talked about before, but you're going to get a lot of the value back out of those cards. And trust me, if you just have a pile of rares from your draft sitting there and you're not building a deck and you're not doing anything with them, get them sent in, because once things rotate out, they lose a bunch of value. You don't want to wait and procrastinate. You'll be happy. You'll get a little store credit going and you can pick up some singles or some sealed product or whatever. Okay, that's going to do it for this episode of LR. We will see you next week, and we should be doing the sealed episode next week. So we'll see you then.
So, Marshall, I'm sure you're familiar with the prisoner's dilemma. This is where
I am.
You have 2 people, 2 criminals, and they're questioned by the police. They can either inform on each other or not, and they don't know what the other person is doing. If neither informs, they get, say, 3 years in prison each. If one informs and the other doesn't, the informer gets off completely free, but the other person gets 10 years in prison. But if they both inform, they get like 7 years in prison. Mm-hmm. Basically, if both of you cooperate with each other, it's overall better for you. But if one of you defects and the other doesn't, the person who did not defect, who played nice, gets punished hard.
Yeah, super hard.
This comes up sometimes before the Pro Tour in a kind of funny way. So you have a testing team, and a lot of the teams that are on, especially the big pro teams, are 12 to 16 people. Mm-hmm. And what can happen sometimes is people get a little biased by all the people around them, and they, maybe unconsciously have a tendency to put in cards that are good against their teammates in their constructed deck. And
this has happened. I've seen this happen.
Oh yeah, there's good versions of this and bad versions of this, and so it's actually kind of interesting because, on the one hand, you should not. I believe, and a lot of the teammates I tend to team with, and a lot of other teams believe you shouldn't make deck construction decisions based on your teammates. Like, you especially if you're playing a different deck where there was I'm not going to name names, but there was someone who was thinking about putting Aethersworn Canonist in the sideboard of their affinity deck because they thought there'd be a lot of Storm when the whole rest of their team was playing Storm. And they were informed by their team, if you do that, you're not on the team. but even in a less severe version, and here's one example where I think it was handled quite nicely. This is Pantheon, right? This is, Huey and Owen, Finkel and Nassif, like those guys. They were playing mono blue at Pro Tour Theros and mono blue Devotion. And what they were considering was how many gainsays to put in their sideboard. This is a 1 and a blue counter target blue spell. The resolution they settled on was you can put as many as you want in your sideboard, right? Depending on what you think the field is going to be. But if 2 teammates play, both players can only side in as many gainsays as the person with fewer gainsays. So,
that's interesting.
Let's say Finkel decided to play 2 gainsays, but Owen thought there'd be a lot of blue decks, so he played 4. When they played in the Pro Tour, they could only board in 2 each because they did not want to reward teammates for having extra gainsays against their teammates. And I thought that was a great solution because
that's a really smart way to do it.
Because where it goes bad is when you're like, well, I'm going to put in 4 gainsays, and then your teammates kind of feel compelled to do the same. And now all of a sudden, both of you have decks that are worse against the field, but better against your teammate. That's a way to basically take equity and give it to the field and lower your whole team's equity, right?
Yeah, and for sure.
It has gone wrong in some situations. There was a unnamed Hall of Famer who plays a lot of Hearthstone who played 3 or 4 copies of Mirren Crusader, Pro Green Crusader, Pro Green Pro Black, at a 24-person tournament at Worlds when you're playing straight green black. And the reason that it was a kind of hard to swallow was most of the green black decks at the time were Jund and had Lightning Bolt, so Mirren Crusader wasn't good, but it was kind of the perfect card against straight green black. So that is a situation where that was equity being taken from your teammates, and that they were not pleased about that outcome. Though I thought it was funny. I had no stake.
I remember
in the outcome.
Yeah, if you and I were in jail, would you narc me out? Or would you go for the 3
No,
years?
Definitely not. I would hold fast. You should definitely do that well. And
I would. It's not even a question whether I would. I obviously would. I'm very smart.
Yeah. So we neither of us say a word, and I think we both serve our 3 years, and we'll be fine.
All right.
It's a deal, right?
Yeah, I'm in. It's a deal.